session, we're going to look at the differences between physical goods and intangible services, and the challenges that companies face from being able to design processes for delivering physical goods and delivering intangible services. So first, most products, you can think of most products as being either a physical good or an intangible service, and from an operations perspective, the operations have to be designed based on a manufacturing oriented or an operation that's focusing more on activities and information. Because if you think about services, they're going to involve employees and customers are going to be involved in the process for delivering the services in some proportion. Sometimes they're both going to be there, and sometimes it's going to be employees, and sometimes it's going to be customers. And there's going to be information exchange that's going to happen when you're thinking about services. So for example, if you're thinking about an insurance company or an accountancy firm, they are relying on focusing on information and transforming information into something that's more value added for the customer. Now, most products are going to be on this continuum. They're not going to be on one end on the other. They're going to be on the continuum of whether they'll be a physical good or an intangible services. So we can think of them as bundles of some service aspects and some goods aspects. To take this notion a little bit further, the idea of physical goods and intangible services, here are a few examples of physical goods and intangible services. On one extreme, you have salt and automobiles, and on the other extreme, you have medical diagnosis and root canals. Now, what you'll notice here is that even within services, you're going to have some kind of an implied level of satisfaction that a customer will have based on the service that they're getting. What we mean by that is when somebody goes for a medical diagnosis, they have to imply their level of service based on how they were treated at the clinic where they got their medical diagnosis. They're not necessarily going to know much about the quality of the diagnosis other than what they can imply from other things that they experienced at the clinic. Versus if you're talking about services such as TV repair or a haircut, you're talking more about the quality being explicit at the end of the service receipt. You can basically talk about the service experience, but you can also talk about the quality of the actual service that you received. So even within services, there's going to be some differentiation along this continuum of intangible services. So the challenge that companies face when they're talking about services is that there are things that customers are expecting and have to be delivered in a real time from the customer. So at this point, what I'd like you to do is consider Starbucks, the coffee company that most of you may be familiar with. If you're not, you can think of any coffee company that you would be familiar with, and think of what they are trying to provide their customers. So specifically for Starbucks, what are the physical goods and what are the intangible services that customers expect when they go to a Starbucks store to get coffee? So when you thought of a Starbucks or a similar coffee company, the physical goods are simple. You thought of coffee, tea, perhaps other drinks that the store provides. The intangible services are going to be mainly focused on the ambience that the coffee shop will have, the internet facility, the seating capacity that they will have in terms of you go to a coffee shop with the expectation that you're going to sit and have a cup of coffee with your work, or you're going to be chatting with colleagues or friends, and you expect there to be a certain capacity to that coffee shop. So those would be the intangibles that you expect at the coffee shop. Think about Caterpillar. Very different from Starbucks. Caterpillar is a company that makes heavy equipment, earth-moving equipment, tractors, farm equipment, those kinds of things. Now, you would think of this as being mainly a physical goods company. It makes heavy equipment. However, even they, according to the website, you can find this on Caterpillar.com, talk about the idea that they're offering more than simply their product to the customer. When they sell heavy equipment to their customer, they're offering the idea that it's an experience that is going to be beneficial for the customer, that the deal that they're making with the customer is more than just the selling of the tractor, that they can always get good after-sales service, that they can always get advice from Caterpillar on the product or on the use of the product that they're selling them. So it's a goods and services bundle that a customer is getting even from a company like Caterpillar.com. Now, if you think about the difference between manufactured goods and services, you can think about it in a number of ways, and these ways will also get to why it is challenging for operations management to deliver services. Why does it become more difficult as compared to manufactured goods? So think about the contrast between manufactured goods and services as you're taking a look at these different elements. So for the first element is dimensions of quality. When you think about a service, the dimensions of quality are much more intangible. What the customer wants is something that is going to be a good feeling, a satisfaction from going through a haircut, going to a healthcare clinic, going to a restaurant, is going to be very different for each customer. Each customer is going to have a very different expectation, or at least at a narrow level, it's going to be different. At a broad level, it might be similar, but at a narrow level, it's going to be different. On the second element of inventory, it's virtually impossible to be able to have stock of services that a customer might want. You can't have stock of time during dinner for customers who are going to come into your restaurant. So in terms of inventory, services can think of capacity as being inventory. They can plan on having some people who come in part-time and make up that capacity, and that can be their inventory. But they can't really think of inventory in terms of time that the customer is going to spend at their restaurant, for example. Production and consumption in services is mostly simultaneous. So when you're thinking of services like a restaurant or a haircut, the production and consumption is right there, and that also goes back to the idea of you can't really have inventory in a service. Customers are intricately involved in the service itself. So the customer is there getting their service, or the customer is even involved in the production of the service. Why does that make it challenging for operations? It's because customers are human beings and they bring in variation into the process. They have different expectations, they have different abilities, and they're going to bring in variation into the process, which makes it challenging for operations management to make the process effective and efficient for customers. Similarly, the role of employees. Employees, like customers, are going to be human beings with different moods, with different attitudes when they come to work on a particular day, and that's going to have an impact on trying to manage the efficiency of the process, trying to manage the effectiveness of the process. That variation will play a role. Returns and repairs can have a very different meaning when you're talking about goods versus services. If a physical good doesn't satisfy a customer, you can always offer a return guarantee. In the case of services, that has a different meaning in the sense that what do you offer if somebody's not satisfied with a haircut? You can offer a second haircut at a discount or free, but there's not really much you can do for that particular haircut. Same thing for a meal that a customer has already consumed. There's not much you can do. At the same time, you can turn this around and say that service recovery can be immediate. If you notice that a customer doesn't like anything, it is going to be right in the employee's face. So that's actually can be an advantage if you think about it from an operations perspective, because in manufactured goods, customers might not complain. So if you're talking about returns and repairs, customers might not complain. They might just give up on your product and go buy a different product, versus when you're talking about services, because the employee is going to be able to see that the customer is not satisfied, they might be able to have a service recovery that might make the customer a customer for life if they're satisfied with the service recovery. So that can be an advantage, although it's considered more of a challenge for operations management. A service operation can be divided into a front office and a back office based on where the employees and customers are interacting and where the employees are doing some back office operations that need to be done for the service to run. So for example, if you take a coffee shop, you have customers coming in, placing their orders, making their payment, waiting to pick up their orders, and then going to the sitting area. In the back office, what you have is employees working on different aspects. The key difference between these two is that in the front office, you have the customer and employee interacting, which makes it more inefficient if you think about it, because there's variation coming from both sides. Customer wants different things and employees have to react to that. At the same time, involving the customer in that aspect of production makes it easy to customize for the customer. So if you need to make some changes for that customer, it makes it quick and easy if that is going to happen in the front office. While in the back office, you can focus more on making the process more efficient. You can use techniques to standardize the way drinks are pre-mixed. You can use automation to make the process more efficient at the back end where the customer is not involved. So that's a key difference between the front office and the back office. If you think of the front office, normally you think of it as adding inefficiencies. However, you can turn this concept around and think of the idea of a front office as a golden opportunity. It's a golden opportunity because it is giving you the opportunity to delight the customer. The customers can have different requirements and needs, but also the employees can react to those and make sure that the customer's needs are satisfied, even if they're different from what is normally expected. It increases the uncertainties because the customer might demand something different, which the employee might not be able to deliver, in which case it's a little bit risky when you have things in the front office. There are inefficiencies in service delivery. You might have different types of customers that are going through from the front office through that line. So for example, if you are a bank and you have a teller at which there are customers waiting, there might be a customer who wants to chat about the weather, who wants to talk about 10 other things other than simply getting their business done and moving on, while there may be another customer who is in a rush and just wants to cash their check and leave really quickly. So that's where you say, well, we're going to move this operation to the back office and use the ATM, self-serve ATM, where the customer can get efficient service delivery. So that's what you have to think about between the front office and the back office. The front office does provide openings for hybrid strategies. We've used the example of Subway sandwiches. Subway sandwiches are an example of a hybrid strategy where you are mass producing some of the products, and then you're using the customer input to give them a customized product. So that's a hybrid strategy based on the idea that customer is going to be involved in the production of the service in the front office. The service profit chain is a framework. It's a model that can be used to make services more profitable. So based on this, you can think of how services can be more profitable. And the idea is that you have employees and customers. If you have your employees trained well to do the tasks that they're supposed to do, you give them the technology that they need, you give them the training that they need, the knowledge that they need to do their tasks well, and you keep them satisfied in the workplace. There's employee satisfaction, as well as you give them the right incentives and the right autonomy for them to make decisions. What that can result in is giving you good external service quality. So the service profit chain talks about this as internal service quality being the service quality that is that is from the point of view of the employee. The employees are happy about the service that they're providing. If that's the case, then the customers are happy with the service that they're getting, and which further leads to customer satisfaction, customers coming back often to get the service from the same provider, and that leads to profits and growth in sales. So this is a model that is about profitability in the service profit chain that came out of research at the Harvard Business School, and that in a very simple way brings out the idea that you have to think about employee satisfaction, especially in a service context, because that's going to be directly related to customer satisfaction. Now, why does this become challenging? This becomes challenging because if you think about the service concepts, there are several contradictions within the service concept. So let's take this triad, this triangle, which is made up of employees, customers, and the company itself. If you think between the employees and the service organization, the company, probably wants to have a standardized process so that it's more effective, more efficient, and wants to have standard times for how much time it should take for the service to be delivered, and that's more about process control. Employees want to say that every customer is different, and therefore we should have the leeway of being able to customize and take whatever time it takes to deliver the service in the right way to the customer, and if a redo is required by the customer, we should be able to have the autonomy to do that. So there's a tension there, there's a contradiction there between what the employees will need to give good services and what the company wants in terms of providing good services in an efficient way. The same kind of tension is going to be there between the company and the customers. Customers want customer satisfaction based on whatever their needs are. And the customer is always going to be queen or king, and whatever their needs are should be satisfied by the company, whereas the company is going to focus on more standardization of their service because they want to provide these services at a lower cost and be able to do this in a predictable amount of time. Now, even between the employees and the customers are going to have certain expectations, and if the employees don't have the autonomy to react to those customers, the customers are not going to be satisfied. So there's going to be some tension between who has control over the process between the employees and the customers. Now, take two of the conflicting objectives that we saw in the service encounter triad on the previous slide. Take the customer perception of service and the cost to service provider. So just to make the idea clear, we have this graph here that has on the y-axis the quality of service experience for the customer. So what you can see is when the quality of service experience is high, customer satisfaction is high. Their cost is lower. Customers' cost is lower. While as the quality of experience goes higher, the provider's cost becomes higher. Now, why is that the case? Why does a provider have to spend more in order to give a better experience to the customer? And the reason, according to Frances Frei, based on some research that was done at the Harvard Business School, is that there's variability that customers bring into the service process, and that's not a surprise. We are talking about human beings having different expectations, so there are variabilities based on there being interaction with human beings in services. And she categorizes these variabilities into 5 different types. So the first one is arrival variability, which simply stated is that customers don't arrive at a constant rate. Customers don't arrive based on providers' expectations. They arrive based on their own wishes, right? So you have sometimes you have grocery aisles that are completely empty, and sometimes you have a big line. Sometimes at the coffee shop it's completely empty, and sometimes you have a big line. A request variability is the second categorization that she talks about, and that's the idea that every customer wants different things from the same product. When you go to a restaurant, you might have special requests. Now, this reminds me of this movie, When Harry Met Sally, and there's a very popular scene in which Meg Ryan is ordering a salad, and she has a very elaborate set of choices that she makes when she's ordering that salad. So that would be a prime example of request variability of customers wanting different things from the same process. Capability variability. Customers might have different levels of competence in trying to explain what they want, in even helping the provider giving them service. So somebody who goes to a health clinic might find it difficult to exactly explain their symptoms so that the nurse or the doctor can treat them properly. Effort variability is the idea that, for example, when you go to do your taxes with your tax consultant, if you haven't kept your papers all systematically, you haven't taken the effort as a customer, but you're expecting good service from your tax consultant. So that's effort variability because there's somebody else who might be very systematic about it and might get done quicker and might get better service. So for no fault of the tax consultant, because of the lack of effort from the customer, there's a dissatisfaction with the service that you attribute to the service provider. Subjective preference capability is the idea that not everybody expects the same thing from a service. Something that can satisfy somebody might be actually a dissatisfier for something else. So for example, when I give my credit card to pay for something, sometimes the person who takes the credit card will read the name off of there and thank me with my first name. Now, it may make some people happy. It makes me uneasy that somebody's reading that name off, and I don't appreciate that. So that is what Francis Fry calls subjective preference variability in this article. Now, this article does a nice job of taking this idea of variability and talking about how do service companies generally deal with variability. So here's the traditional idea, the conventional idea with which companies deal with this. So when you have a high degree of variability, if the service provider is going to try and accommodate it, it would be classic variability accommodation. What does that mean? That the restaurant has a lot of excess capacity, that the restaurant keeps a lot of excess inventory of things based on the customer might ask for something that we don't normally offer. So they don't strictly stick to their menu, but they are willing to accommodate whatever the customer wants. Now that's going to be expensive for the service provider. The cost to serve will be very high. On the left part of this diagonal, you see the classic variability reduction, which is low cost to serve, but low quality of service experience. So you can think of budget airlines being in that category, right? They say, well, you're only going to get taken from point A to point B, and if you want to check in your bags, you're going to have to pay extra for it, and you're not going to get snacks on the plane. Similarly, if you think about fast food and the very limited menu that they have, it's based on the idea that they don't have to train their people too much, and they're giving you a limited menu. While the diagonal line shows the classic trade-off that we have between cost of service and quality experience, which is that if you want a high level of service experience, it's going to cost a lot for the service provider, and vice versa. A low level of service experience means low costs. There are ways in which the trade-off can be broken, and uncompromised variability reduction is the idea that you can train your customers in such a way that although you're offering them a lot of different variety, they are helping you out in terms of pointing out exactly they want in your language. So for example, Starbucks uses this idea of training customers in ways in which they place their orders. So although Starbucks offers a large variety of drinks, it's easy for them to handle it because they're having the customer give them the order in a specific way. Another example of uncompromised variability reduction is the idea of triage, of taking a set of customers that have variable expectations and offering it to them in a low-cost way, although you are separating them into different groups. So when you think about in our schools, we have this idea of students who are more interested in certain subjects being sent to different classrooms based on their interests. That would be an idea of reducing the variability from that particular set of students and giving them the best service within that particular area. On the other hand, the idea of a low-cost variability accommodation is the idea that you provide a better level of service while keeping the cost the same. And there, the idea is that you may involve the customer in the production. So, for example, having a sandwich shop that involves the customers in accommodating the variability that they want, and that's a low-cost way because you are dealing with a co-production kind of environment, and the customer is involved there. You can also have some kind of temporary accommodation in terms of when there is high demand, when there is arrival variability, you have temporary employees who can take up that demand, and in that sense you have low-cost variability accommodation. So in that sense you're not increasing your total costs. So the important point here, it's easy to get lost in this idea of which strategy are we following. Is it uncompromised variability reduction or the low-cost variability accommodation? And I don't think that's the point that we should take away from this. The point is that we should think of ways in which we can break the trade-off, whether it is being able to do it based on different types of training for employees or different types of ways in which we can triage the customers. Finally, it's all about making sure that you make the correct diagnosis in terms of trying out these different strategies. So there are examples of companies that have had missteps. The idea that Southwest Airlines, which is initially trumpeting the fact that they don't have any kind of assigned seats, and they were able to deal with reduction of variation from that perspective, in that they were getting people who did not really care about that aspect of assigned seats. And when they tried to move towards getting assigned seats or giving assigned seats to passengers, there was a lot of pushback, so they were not able to do that. The other example that we have from this article from Francis Fry is the example of Tiffany's, a store that is a luxury store where the salespeople were giving very personal attention to their customers, and they wanted to move into this market where they're giving service to many people, and they tried to use beepers that they were giving to their customers, and that didn't go very well. So to summarize this whole idea of breaking the trade-off, it's that companies need to be careful. They need to keep in mind the psychology of customers when they try to change strategies in terms of moving from classic variability reduction to uncompromised, or from classic accommodation to low-cost accommodation, and they need to train their employees in such a way that they are able to execute the strategies that they have.